la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion 71 du Comité permanent du patrimoine canadien. Je voudrais reconnaître que cette réunion a lieu sur le territoire traditionnel et non cédé du peuple algonquin et de l'Anishinaabe. La réunion d'aujourd'hui déroule sous format hybride, conformément à l'ordre de la Chambre adopté le jeudi 23 juin 2022. So, I'm going to suggest a couple of housekeeping things to you. While masks are not mandated any longer, it is recommended that if you're in a room, that in order to protect from respiratory illnesses, that you wear a mask. And I want to remind everyone that you are not allowed to take
Madame la Présidente, désolé de vous interrompre, la traduction ne fonctionne pas.
We're not getting translation? Okay. When I checked in, everything seemed to be fine with the translators, so I don't know what's happened since.
Oh, you should be good to go.
Should be good to go. So does that mean that nobody heard me opening it? Or shall I just continue?
Just continue, please.
To everyone that you are not allowed to take photographs or screenshots of the screen. Everything will be out on the public website so that you can see yourself and whatever was said. And everything that you say should go through the chair. So please remember that to go through the chair when you're speaking, and don't speak unless I indicate that you are given the opportunity to speak. At the bottom of your screen is a little globe icon, and on it you can click it. And for those of you in the room, I think you know what to do. You've been doing this for long enough. You can get floor, you can get French, or you can get English. Those virtually, again, if you click on that, you can actually get English or French translations. Now, so pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by this committee on Tuesday, September the 20th, 2022, the committee is meeting to continue its study on safe sport in Canada. We have a lineup of witnesses, and for the witnesses, I would say, each of you, if you're an individual, has 5 minutes, but if you're with a group, the group has only 5 minutes to present. I will give you a 30-second literal shout out when you have 30 seconds left. So I shall begin with...
Actually, Dr. Fry, you can't see, but MP Martin Shields has his hand up. He's requesting the floor.
I can't see him, actually, no. Mr. Shields.
Thank you. I would request 5 minutes of business at the end of the meeting.
We are already starting this meeting very late, so it's going to be a truncated meeting. But certainly, I think if no one is in disagreement on the committee, we could certainly try and give you that 5 minutes, Martin. All right. Now, the witnesses, I will just list them, and then I will just call your name when it's time for you to go. We have Teresa Fowler, Assistant Professor, Concordia University of Edmonton, by video conference. Dr. Gretchen Kerr, Professor, the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education, University of Toronto, by video conference. Bruce Kidd, Professor Emeritus, Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education, University of Toronto, by video conference. Then we have Alias Solution Inc., and we have representing them Vicky Poirier, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Danny Wheel, Executive Vice President. ITP Sport and Recreation Inc., Alison Forsyth, Chief Operating Officer, and Ilan Yampolsky, Chief Executive Officer. Then we have the World Association of Ice Hockey Players Unions, represented by Randall Gumbly, who is a consultant. So I begin with Ms. Fowler. Please, for 5 minutes, begin now.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Teresa Fowler. My pronouns are she and her. I'm coming to you from Concordia University of Edmonton, which is in Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Region 4. Thank you to the committee for the time to present today and for allying parliamentarians who are working to move sport in Canada to be safe inclusive, and a site for children and youth to flourish in good health. During my 5 minutes, I will speak about cultural reproduction through my lens as a researcher in masculinity, specifically in hockey culture, and a current brand of culture that needs to be shifted. Cultural reproduction is a process by which cultural values and practices are passed down from generation to generation and occurs through various mechanisms, including socialization and the media. Socialization is how individuals learn and internalize cultural norms and values through interactions with family, peers, and within social institutions such as sport. The media also shapes individuals' perceptions of the world and reinforces certain cultural values and beliefs, such as broadcasting more professional men's sporting events over women's. Cultural reproduction perpetuates existing inequalities and power structures, such as the culture of silence in sport. The culture of silence occurs when individuals or groups refrain from speaking about important issues or concerns due to fear, shame, or a belief that their voice will not be heard or valued. Various factors, including power imbalance, social norms, and the fear of retribution or backlash, can perpetuate the culture of silence in sport. For example, in our research with professional men's ice hockey players, many spoke about the precarity of their positions on their teams. For some, there was a constant reminder of this as they had to walk past a shopping cart by the doorway. If a player did not meet the coach's expectations, they would find their equipment in a garbage bag in the shopping cart. Another player was told to not ask questions when they moved up to a different league. In 2017, former NHL player Corey Hirsch wrote a poignant essay in the Players' Tribune about the impact of the culture of silence on the inability to talk about mental health issues openly. These are his words. After the morning skate, I grabbed an extra stick blade from the bin and I stuffed it in my bag. When I got back to my hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed in silence and I took out the blade. The plan was to break my hand and hide the injury until the next day of practice. That way I could go down after taking a shot and the team would send me home to recover without knowing what was really going on. The culture of silence can have negative impacts on both individuals and society as a whole. It can prevent important issues from being addressed and perpetuate social inequalities and injustices. The culture of silence reproduces in sport due to the precarity of athletes' positions, parents' fear that their children will be benched, children's fear of not meeting someone's expectations, so they remain silent even when abused. But the culture of silence also silences. If the culture of silence continues to reproduce in sport in Canada, we will continue to have abusive players become coaches, and those coaches moved around due to their perceived fame. Last summer, we witnessed the strength of the reproduction of this culture of power through this committee as Scott Smith refused to acknowledge his role in perpetuating a dangerous culture, and when Andrea Skinner stated to this committee that leadership changes were unnecessary. However, we have also seen positive outcomes from this committee, such as the changes happening within sport, some level of accountability, as well as people are now talking about sport in a critical way around their kitchen tables. But what we also need is action. To move sport to a place where it is safe, we must first know what we mean by safe and for who. Certainly, sport is not safe unless you fit the norm and you're silent, which is how this culture reproduces. For example, professional men's ice hockey remains homophobic, as highlighted by James Reimer of the San Jose Sharks this weekend, refusing to wear a Pride jersey and then othering Nazem Kadri, the first Muslim to win the Stanley Cup. There are currently no outed gay men playing in the National Hockey League, and we only say out because it's normal to be in a heterosexual relationship. If safe means that children and youth can participate in a sport free from maltreatment, then sport must disrupt how it reproduces an unhealthy culture. For that disruption, I suggest the following. I support a call for a judicial inquiry into sport in Canada. A judicial inquiry is a powerful mechanism to reveal truths, to engage accountability and transparency in government and other public institutions that receive funding from the federal government. I call on the Government of Canada to move sport into the portfolio of health. By shifting sport into health, the lens changes, the focus changes. Instead of chasing medals and continuing an unhealthy culture, sport can be centered on health, reducing obesity, increasing well-being, and providing children and families with means to live active and healthy lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fowler. Now, I just want to ask a quick question. I have two people from the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education, University of Toronto. Are you coming as a group or are you coming as individuals? You're
as
written down here
individuals.
as individuals, so you're speaking.
As individuals.
All right,
Individuals.
Ms. Kerr, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to appear before you today. And it's wonderful that Canadian Heritage Parliamentary Committee has taken such interest in the state of Canadian sport. Sport is clearly in the public interest, but only rarely does Parliament and its committee take such an active interest. This presentation, and that of my colleague later today, will build upon the points we made in a brief submitted earlier last December with our colleague Peter Donnelly to this committee. Specifically, I will emphasize 3 points. One is that attention must be paid to all forms of threats to athlete welfare. 2, that significant progress has been made with the UCCMS and OSIC, but these must be extended across the sports sector. And 3, that further advancements must be athlete-supported and research-driven. First, it's important to clarify what we're talking about with the term safe sport. As stated in the Universal Code of Conduct to prevent and address maltreatment in sport, the term maltreatment is used intentionally. This term is an umbrella term, also used by the World Health Organization, that encompasses forms of abuse, including sexual, physical, and psychological abuse, as well as neglect, bullying, harassment, and discrimination. This breadth is important as all forms of maltreatment are violations of human rights. At their foundation, they represent a misuse of power, and all can be associated with short and long-term negative health outcomes. While the negative effects of sexual abuse seem intuitive to us, research evidence indicates that repeated experiences of psychological abuse, neglect, and discrimination can be equally harmful to health and well-being. Further, all of the prevalent studies conducted in Canada and internationally show a consistent pattern, namely that psychological abuse and neglect are the most commonly reported forms of harm by athletes, regardless of sport, level of participation, and gender. It's these forms of maltreatment that account for athletes' descriptions of their sport context as toxic and must be addressed in future safe sport-related policies and education. One of the strengths of the UCCMS is that it reflects this breadth of harms. Compared to other countries, the UCCMS provides the most comprehensive and realistic standard of what harms can be in sport. Another strength of the UCCMS is that it was initiated by athletes through their call for a harmonized code of conduct across sport so that every athlete, regardless of level, sport, or geographical region of the country, can expect the adherence to the same code. The UCCMS was developed through broad consultations across the country in every province and territory. These consultations revealed a challenge facing the sport community, namely the need to dismantle the assumptions that psychological harm are just sport, and thus are widely accepted as normal and even necessary tools for realizing athlete talent and winning. This finding also runs contrary to expected conduct in other domains in which young people engage. So the UCCMS represents an important accomplishment, an important first step in changing the culture. It articulates prohibited conduct and becomes the standard for expectations by participants and sport leaders alike. But our work is not done. Now it needs to be rolled out across the entire sports sector as a requirement, and all sport organizations from community level to provincial and national levels must be aligned in its adoption. The second sign of progress is the establishment of the Office of Sport Integrity Commissioner, which again arose in response to athletes' calls for an independent reporting and complaint mechanism. It was also informed by research indicating that fewer than 15% of athletes who have ever experienced maltreatment ever submit a formal report or complaint. While implementation is slower than we'd like, it's an important first and positive step in the right direction. We must keep the foot on the accelerator to continue this important work and avoid what we've seen in the past of cycles of attempted reform in Canadian sport following high-profile cases, public scrutiny, and proposed reform, only to have those reforms diminished.
Ms. Kerr, I would ask you to wrap up. You are very much over time. Thank you very much. You can probably elaborate in your answers later on. And so now I go to Professor Kidd. 5 minutes, please, Professor Kidd.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My purpose today is to urge you to affirm the important reforms that have recently been introduced: the Universal Code of Conduct to address and prevent maltreatment in sport, and the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner, and see that they are effectively implemented and sustained. I speak as someone who has been directly involved in the policy debates in Canadian sport for more than 60 years. As an athlete, researcher, athletic director, and chair of federal, Ontario, and Commonwealth policy advisory bodies. From that perspective, I've seen more progress towards safe sport in the last 4 years than at any other time. I fear that unless the UCCMS and OSIC are systematically and resolutely implemented, they will lose support and be quickly forgotten, as earlier reform proposals were forgotten. I remind you that as an outgrowth of the progressive ideas set in motion by protests, headlines, and hearings associated with the Dublin Commission more than 30 years ago, Sport Canada enacted a strong policy to address sexual harassment, only to let it slide into oblivion. At the same time, Canada took a much more inclusive, athlete-centered approach to governance through the Canadian Sport Council, only to let it fade and die in the cutbacks of the 1990s. Progress can be reversed. As Gretchen said, the UCCMS was initiated by athletes. It is evidence-based, has the support of a broad coalition of national sports leaders. It is one of the most comprehensive such codes in the world, a huge Canadian achievement. But it's barely known. To realize broad cultural change, the UCCMS must be effectively rolled out and communicated so the prohibitions and empowering values it asserts are understood and embraced at every level, from the professional leagues, the Olympic sector, university, college, and school sport to the sandlot. We need a massive pan-Canadian campaign in English, French, and Indigenous languages with active workshops, athlete leaders, public service announcements, media discussion, and full FPT endorsement. It must become as well-known a characteristic of the Canadian sports system as anti-doping, fair play, and the pursuit of excellence. A basis for hiring, evaluation, and promotion. In terms of OSIC, the federal government must ensure that all sports bodies sign on. As I understand it, the PT sports ministers have agreed to sign on, as Nova Scotia has now done, or create their own aligned structures, as in Quebec. But we must hold all 13 PT governments to such commitments. Making an effective new organization with care and attention to both trauma-informed procedures and natural justice will take time. I should point out that getting the Sport Dispute Resolution Centre of Canada up and running 20-odd years ago took 4 years of careful work. Establishing sexual harassment policies and procedures in public institutions such as universities have also taken time. Let's give OSIC our understanding while asking it to communicate widely, involve athletes in its decisions, and test its various procedures before full release to ensure confidence and credibility. In addition, athlete representatives must be embedded in all decision-making bodies with parity, voice, and vote. The Red Deer Declaration, developed from recommendations of a broadly represented group with wide consultation, must be fully implemented. Canada must create and enforce a code of conduct for governance, the way Australia, the European Union, and the UK did a decade ago.
30 seconds.
And there must be significant investment in capacity building. Canadian sport is already woefully underfunded. We cannot achieve safe sport without additional staff, extensive training, and other resources. Out of crisis comes change. Well, this is an exceedingly difficult time for Canadian sport. Public attention and extensive discussion have generated promising solutions. Yet, unless a concerted effort is made to implement the reforms on a comprehensive, sustained basis, their potential will only evaporate in the same way as earlier reforms. So let's get it done.
Thank you, Professor Kidd. And again, you can expand when the questions period occurs. Now I'm going to go to Alias. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Is it Alias or Alias? Alias Solution Inc. And I have Ms. Poirier and Mr. Ville. And I don't know which one of you would speak, but you have 5 minutes for the group. Thank you.
Honourable Canadian Heritage Standing Committee members and to the broader Canadian safe sport community, we thank you deeply for the opportunity to appear before you today. We come to you as business leaders in the field of safe sport, and we've served as complaints officer and safe sport reporting mechanism for 90 sport and leisure federations in the province of Quebec over the last couple of years, as mandated by our Regroupement Loisirs et Sports du Québec. The RLSQ. We also appear in front of you as parents of competitive athletes, football, rugby, baseball, hockey. My name is Vicky Poirier. I am the founder and president of Alias, and I am joined by my colleague, Danny Weil, executive vice president, Alias. It is crucial that when someone builds up the courage to report, that they are met with compassion, professionalism, and efficiency. I began this journey of Alias based on my background as a forensic accountant, where I was investigating devastating frauds. I felt the fraud I was seeing could have been prevented if someone had come forward, but those witnesses were not speaking up because they were afraid of retaliation, afraid of not being believed. This is why I created Alias, a confidential and anonymous reporting whistleblowing mechanism designed to see a case from intake through to resolution. I quickly realized that the majority of the issues were not financial in nature, but instead related to human interactions. The passion inside me was lit to make a difference, and since that day, we receive and treat complaints of all kinds. In building Alias, our ethos is governed by three main principles: efficiency, ethics, and objectivity. As I said earlier, we act as a complaints officer.
The federal sports minister called on all provinces and territories to have a centralized sport policy, as is the standard set in Quebec. We are proud to be setting the pace for Canada. Through our lived experience, we hope to help other provinces do the same. Over the last 2 years, in Quebec sports and leisure, Alias has received and managed over 500 complaints. We have established a standard of initial contact within 48 hours of a claim being received, and within 10 days of receipt, we analyze and confirm a claim's eligibility. For the complainant, this gives them comfort that their matter is being addressed and taken seriously. And for the organizations involved, this ensures that they are on top of the issues happening amongst their stakeholders with best practices to resolve. In the brief on safe sport submitted by Alias to the Canadian Heritage Standing Committee on March 22nd, 2023, we put forward recommendations that summarized the three following principles. One, the standardization of process. As done in Quebec, each province can and should have a centralized policy and process for complaints, case management, and case follow-through. The execution must be done by a qualified multidisciplinary team. The second is that programs must be built for scale without compromising quality or confidentiality. Given the importance of each individual report, the program must be built to ensure that each intake is treated expediently and that with care and confidentiality. There must be no degradation of quality based on scope and scale. And finally, communication is key. Communication of the mechanism itself so that sport stakeholders know how and where they can make a report. Ongoing communication with the person who has filed a report and ensuring that all stakeholders involved throughout the reporting process remain informed. In closing, as leaders in safe sport in Canada, it is our responsibility to contribute to the efforts to put an end to the toxic culture of silence. By offering a voice for victims and stakeholders in sport, we are sending a powerful message that any form of unacceptable behavior will not be tolerated. With sport as such a central fabric to society, the government's interest to promote best practices in reporting acts of wrongdoing will have a major impact on the lives of Canadian citizens. We thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. And I now go to the next witness, which will be ITP Sport and Recreation, Inc. And we have Ms. Forsyth and Mr. Yampolsky. And you have 5 minutes for either one of you who wishes to speak. Not for each, but for the group. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and the honorable members of this committee. Thank you for inviting us here today to share our knowledge of safe sport and the current landscape in our country. My name is Alison Forsyth, and I co-founded Canada's only full-service safe sport consulting agency, ITP Sport and Recreation. I am joined today in the room by my business partner, Ilan Yampolsky. Ilan has worked in safeguarding of children and safe sport for over 10 years, holding critical positions at Skate Canada, Tennis Canada, and prior to that with Scouts Canada. I am a two-time Olympian. I am the mother of 3 young hockey players, and I am a survivor of egregious sexual abuse within our Canadian sports system. If this horrific experience at the hands of a sexual predator wasn't enough, it was only paralleled by my experience as a whistleblower, which left me completely and utterly gutted and unsupported in my trauma, in my seeking of justice, or even getting the acknowledgement that the abuse even took place for an incredibly long time. Because despite my best efforts, this man continued to be a part-time coach of children for an additional 17 years before a courageous fellow survivor came forward. This time, finally, he went to trial and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. After our trial, a group of survivors, including myself, came out of anonymity to dedicate ourselves to the end of maltreatment in sports, planting the seeds that led to this movement. Since then, I have worked with many government agencies at the federal level as an athlete survivor to begin effecting change. ITP was formed in this process as we recognize the many gaps to government mandates. We provide support and expertise to many organizations interested in taking the theoretical tenets and principles of safe sport and turning them into reality within their organizations. Our aim here today is to share our expertise on the complex nature of safe sport because it is complex. As a survivor, I know I had my own impression of what safe sport was, and this is what I know now. Safe sport is age, gender, and participant level agnostic. It encompasses not 1 or 2, but 8 forms of maltreatment as defined in the Universal Code of Conduct for Maltreatment in Sport. But over the past 4 years, I have learned, as we have, that this challenge is far deeper and far more difficult than we could have imagined. The reality is that our sports system has for decades been accepting of and conducive to maltreatment and abuse. Safe sport is not a problem to solve, and it is not something to be fixed. Safe sport moving forward must be a critical component to every organization at every level of sport in our country. For some of you, I appreciate this movement may be new. For us, we've been at this in some capacity for the last 5 years. Over the course of this time, we have seen progress, but yet this progress has been far too slow. We have seen a few organizations step up and embrace safe sport, but unfortunately, we have also seen way too many others only put in safe sport programming because they had to do so as a condition to receive funding. And we've seen organizations putting in only the minimum standards to tick the box and then move on. The reality of safe sport is there is no got it done when it comes to safeguarding our athletes. Abuse will never be prevented if we only focus on simply what to do once something horrific has already happened. There must be continuous education, enrollment, and continuous improvements. From the yelling and beratement of children, the extreme hazing most recently coming out of the QCHL, and of course, the egregious sexual assault of minors. All this will continue unless we do something big. So how should we live safe sport? As part of our work, our company gets into the front lines. My role is to head up prevention. I go directly into their environments. I evaluate risks such as governance, environmental risks, communication risks, and accepted cultural norms. I also provide all stakeholders with participant appropriate level education and, as necessary, supporting shifts of behavior. We need to eliminate the conditions through which abuse could occur. We develop new systems, evaluate risk factors, and provide education. It is shocking to us how few organizations and participants understand the stages of grooming. Understanding the 4 steps of favoritism, personal bond, isolation, and complicity are steps of grooming that every parent, coach, administrator, and child athlete should know and understand. We also provide independent case management to many organizations across the country. I am not privy to any complaint as this division is separated from prevention. In this work, we use a third-party whistleblower intake company as well as a third-party investigation firm. It is essential that organizations do not manage their own complaints. We need to push down the gas pedal and fast. Cases are coming in and courageous survivors are coming forward faster than we can educate and put safeguarding hiring measures in place. Coaches are becoming fearful of coaching, and officials, we are losing them on a daily basis. Safe sport must have transparent, open communication to encourage everyone to come forward. We look forward to the day when safe sport is a positive term. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. You can elaborate later on when you ask the question. Thank you. And now I go to World Association of Ice Hockey Players Union, to Randolph Gumley. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Gumley.
Madam Chair, I am Randy Gumley, a consultant with the World Association of Ice Hockey Players Union. Before I address this committee on the decades of various forms of abuse suffered by CHL players under the leadership of the Pro Hockey League, the Canadian Hockey League, and its partner NSO Hockey Canada, I do so with the intention of creating awareness in order to create much-needed change in the culture of hockey and sport in general, while protecting athletes' rights in the hopes that this committee will be able to foster a newfound trust for parents, athletes, sponsors within the amateur sporting system in Canada. In 1968, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau appointed a task force to investigate amateur sport in Canada. The task force found that amateur sports should have no affiliation with pro sport and demanded that immediate and drastic action be taken in the following areas: binding minors into contracts which deny players' rights and indentured players into the form of slavery, and how major junior hockey operated under the guise of the amateur system. The Downey report recommended the following: prohibiting teams from entering into contracts with minors, restricting contracts that prohibited the players the freedom to associate both in intra and intra-league, and the separation of pro sport and the NSOs. These recommendations help form what we know today as Section 48 of the Competition Act. But sadly, over a half-century later, these very same issues are alive and well. These athletes are still at the mercy of the cartel hockey group, and in 1976, players playing in the CHL had entered into contracts that required them to pay 20% of their future earnings back to CHL clubs if they made the NHL. In 2001, the Canada Revenue Agency Tax Court ruled that players in the CHL were employees and debunked the student amateur athlete classification from the CHL. In 2013, the CHL was notified of wage and hour violations. The next step that the CHL took was extraordinary in nature. The CHL conspired with the NSO Hockey Canada to change the classification of players from professional to the highest level of non-professional. Then the league issued a memo to its clubs to no longer comply with Canada Revenue Agency regulations. The QMJHL voided all player contracts that used to classify players as employees. In 2014, finally, the CHL was sued for $180 million for wage and hour theft. In 2018, at a Portland Senate hearing, the CHL was informed by players of various forms of abuses in the league. The Portland government denied that the WHL's request for employment standards changes, but weeks later, the CHL tried to intimidate spokespersons just days before a Quebec National Assembly hearing on employment laws by threatening the players with a libel suit if they spoke out against the abuses in sport. In 2018, a criminal complaint was filed with the Competition Bureau of Canada stemming from a clause in a player contract that demanded that the player pay a $500,000 release fee if he left the league. From 2014 to 2020, the CHL, while using Hockey Canada's amateur insurance policies and defending their class action to the tune of about $20 million in legal, plus another $15 million in settle money that came out of the amateur system. The CHL managed to circumvent hour and wage laws in various provinces across Canada, but no one questioned if the laws had to be changed, why weren't the existing laws enforced? Hockey Canada and the CHL had managed to create a system where the CHL attempts to claim amateur status for financial gain, but it maintains a pro system to systematically contaminate players from scholarship eligibility in the NCAA. In 2018, 19, and 20, Hockey Canada, the IHF, and Minister of Sports offices were informed of the various forms of abuses which fell upon deaf ears. In September of 2020, the players sued the NHL, Hockey Canada, and CHL for anti-competitive acts. In 2020, the players also sued in a very high-profile case, as we know today, Daniel Carcillo and Garrett Taylor. I ask you, where is the justice when athletes go to court, but the cartel is able to lobby officials to change laws during the middle of a trial? Where's the justice when the Competition Bureau takes 4 years to act on a complaint? Or when the NSO conspires with a pro sport league to deprive athletes of not only a wage, but to deprive them of access to educational scholarships? Or when Hockey Canada assumes $125 million in a slush fund that is meant to be used for uninsurable events, but when a referee suffers a severe life-threatening crippling injury, spinal injury, Hockey Canada offered him $345 for a payment and said the insurance weren't covered him. That referee, Derek Henderson, spent the next 10 years in courts trying to be paid.
Mr. Lumley, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but you have gone over time, and maybe you can elaborate on some of your points when you have the question and answer period. Now, I'm going to have to, committee, we only will have the ability to have 1-2 rounds, if we can go 15 minutes over time, because we don't have the full 2 hours for this meeting, given the votes. So what we're going to do is start the question and answer. The first round is 6 minutes each, and that is 6 minutes for the question and answer. So if we want to get this thing done, I'm hoping that everybody would be as concise as they could in their questions and their answers. And so I'm going to start with the questions, starting with the Conservative Party, Rachel Thomas. Ms. Thomas, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Sure. My first question here is for Ms. Kerr. I had the opportunity to read through the briefing document that you submitted to the committee in December, and one of the sections that you go through here is with regards to good governance in Canadian sport. You outline a number of important questions that need to be asked. One of them is you raise some questions around the lack of transparency and accountability in Canadian sports governance. I'm wondering if you can highlight for us the main problem that you see there.
Yes, on the issue of governance, first there's the matter of athlete representation in governance, and secondly, the notion of accountability. So to highlight this, Sport Canada previously mandated NSOs to have independent harassment officers to deal with cases around safe sport. And they required this in order to obtain their annual funding. 20 years later, only one of the NSOs still had an independent harassment officer, and yet every year their funding was continued. So the question of accountability also comes into play in terms of answer to your question.
Thank you for highlighting that. And so I'm just curious then, if in fact that has not been followed through on, if that independent officer does not exist, then in your estimation, what should be done?
Well, I think the wonderful progress that has been made to address that is the establishment of OSIC. And as everyone has said, it's new, it's still in progress. Once it's up and running, we either need its extension or an equivalent model that will filter from the national level down to the provincial and community level so that any sport participant across the country has access to an independent complaint mechanism and independent persons with which to report their concerns.
Okay, but am I to understand that for 20 years there's been inadequate accountability in this area, and now even with OSIC coming into effect in 2022, it's my understanding that today we only have 3 provinces that have signed on: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. And in fact, the deadline to sign on to OSIC is actually coming up. It's less than a month away now. Do I have that correct?
It was actually over 20 years. That complaints were addressed by employees of the organization itself, most often the CEO of the sport organization, which of course presents all kinds of conflicts of interest and is an explanation for why there's this culture of silence, as Professor Fowler mentioned, and that so few athletes ever bring their complaints forward.
One of the concerns that we've heard from athletes as well, though, is the fact that they're not trusting of the fact that the process outlined with involving OSIC is fully independent, and that they can be fully transparent and guarantee that they're going to be protected should they whistleblow or complain. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I've heard those concerns as well. And as mentioned by other panelists, OSIC needs time to establish itself and gain trust amongst the athletes. But on the independence question, to me, it's a little bit like saying the Supreme Court justices are not independent because they are funded by the government. At some point, the notion of independence cannot be used in a case like this, but it will take time for OSIC to gain the trust of athletes.
Thank you. Ms. Forsyth, I would actually bring the question over to you as well, given that you have been an athlete and obviously now you're on the side of wanting to receive and investigate complaints.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I mean, I don't work on the complaint side of our business, so I can either obviously respond for a minute about how I feel as an athlete about it, and then I'd like to, if it's okay, to pass it over to Elan, because I don't work in complaints. Is that okay for you? Sure. Okay, great. So from an athlete perspective, there's definitely athletes out there. I mean, I for one, am very respectful of all the different opinions that athletes currently have around the notion around independence. I also know many athletes that are quite happy with OSIC, that are not quite as vocal as some athletes that are not. In addition, I believe myself as an athlete who had nowhere to report to but my CEO who hired the guy who abused me, that I welcome any independent mechanism that can provide a service to the athletes. And what I fear from an athlete level is that if we get caught up in what I will call sort of nuances, and I know that's not maybe a respectful term for many people that have different beliefs around the notion of true or whatever independence, I think that we will slow progress down and we will discourage any participant to come forward and feel safe to report their abuse. And I'll pass it to Elan.
30 seconds left. You're going to have 30 seconds to answer that.
Elan, would you like to add?
There's a little bit to add, and I agree with Gretchen. The definition of independence, we have to stop at some point, and the majority of it has been defined by money exchange in hands between one organization to another, which there's ample example, the same like the Supreme Court, the same like financial audit of any organization that been paid to KPMG, to Deloitte, that come there independently. I think in our case, we believe that professionalism, integrity is most important than subject matter expertise. What my suggestion was always and still is to create an auditory mechanism by the government, by any regulatory mechanism like in any other industry that will come to organizations like ours and many others to see if we're doing our job right.
Thank you very much. I think you can elaborate on that in a subsequent answer. The time is up, and now we're going to go to the Liberals. Ms. Hepner. Lisa, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank also the witnesses for all being here today, and I would begin my questions with Teresa Fowler, if I could. I was interested in your recommendation that we move in Sport Canada, move sport to health from heritage where it is now. And would you please elaborate on what you think that would do? It seems to me it might take away this culture in sport of winning and being the best and take it back to a place where everyone can feel comfortable in sport, regardless of their level of ability. It's about having fun and getting together with your friends. It's not necessarily about being excellent. That's kind of the impression I got from your recommendation. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. And forgive me for my ignorance with respect to how parliamentarians and portfolios work. But from a research lens, when we have theory, right? So as a critical theorist, my lens a certain way. If I'm a quantitative researcher, my lens is a different way. So sport is unhealthy. I think we can all agree. That's why we're all here. That's why all this time and energy is happening. So what happens if we change the lens away from pushing for podiums, away from winning at all costs, towards one that really is what sport ought to be about? And the Aspen Institute Project Play, they published a research report that walks through all of the benefits that happen with sport. However, because sport remains a commodity, remains chasing medals, we see that health gets pushed aside. And we can see how this is bleeding into the education system. For example, in K-12 systems, now we have sport academies. We have children now climbing to get into these programs that really are not health benefit. They're focused more on competition at the earlier age. And the more we keep going early into this idea of winning medals at younger ages, we're losing the benefits of sport.
How much would you say has that had an impact on the problems we have with culture in sport in Canada today?
From my experience and from our research in men's ice hockey, and also as a parent of two athletes, two of our boys were competitive athletes, it's a big part of it. And I'm actually just starting a new research project, and I was sitting on the sidelines at soccer tryouts last night and listening to parents, trying to make sure their kids get the last two spots. There was a grandfather there with a video camera videotaping their child at tryouts. It's like, okay, well, what about the fun? Where are the smiles? Where's the joy? And in our research with the hockey players, not once did any of these professional hockey players talk about the love and the joy of the game of hockey. The only time that they talked about aesthetic moments was when it was a trauma moment, when they were recalling an experience of abuse. That was the only time we got a sense of the smells, right? Why they're there. Not once did they talk about the love of hockey. And so I really think that competition based is what's doing a great disservice to what we're seeing today.
Thank you. I think that's really valuable testimony. And I would perhaps ask Dr. Gretchen Kerr to maybe weigh in on the same vein, because you also brought up this idea that we have this focus on athlete talent and winning rather than the health and fun and other positive benefits that people can get from sports.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. We know that the values that we see playing out in professional sport or at the Olympic level filter down to children's sport. And one of the areas that we need to tackle is how sport in this country is funded. So when we have programs like Own the Podium, which fund athletes and teams based primarily on either their medal performances or the potential for medal finishes, without consideration for the process by which those medals are achieved, then that risks the focus on athlete health and well-being becoming very marginal or non-existent. So it contributes to this win-it-all costs approach based on the funding model. I think there's also value in changing the narrative and asking, rather than focusing on performance excellence or athlete health and well-being, to suggest that the best avenue to obtain performance outcomes is through athlete health and well-being. And that's changing the narrative across the sport landscape. But again, the funding question has to be part of solving the Safe Sport Challenge.
Thank you. And turning back to Alison Forsyth, you mentioned that one of your tasks in your business is to assess governance risks within sports organizations. Could you tell us a little bit about what those risks might look like? What are you looking for when you're going to assess governance risks?
Yeah,
so we're 30 seconds, Ms. Forsyth.
Of course. So what we're looking for specifically is, how is the board operating? Are they in the operations of the business? Are they stepping in to, look at the coach's behavior? So that level of governance, but also the governance within the team. So one of the biggest risks we see in safe sport is that we have head coaches or maybe high performance directors that have way too much sole discretionary decision making. So we're putting way too much power into one role within an organization to make the decisions. And that's where you get lack of oversight and subjectivity. So those would be the coaches that can make all the decisions. That's a big risk for abuse of power.
Thank you, Ms. Forsyth. I now go to the Bloc Québécois for 6 minutes. Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire. Thank you very much, Madam Fry, Madam Chair. My question is to Professor Kerr. Why do you think Minister Saint-Onge is not responding on the calls from many areas to get to the bottom of things? It can be figure skating, hockey, many other sports. And we've heard stories. We heard another one yet recently. Why wouldn't there be an independent inquiry? Ms. Kerr.
Yes, thank you for the question. There are differing points of view on how to best move safe sport forward. As you may know, I'm not a supporter of a public inquiry. I think it will slow down the progress that is being made. It will be extremely costly when those funds could be devoted to putting in proactive solutions like we've heard on the panel today. It also
vraiment un coût qui est en jeu quand on parle de la sécurité.
But we're talking about the safety and health of our athletes. So, I heard your testimony before the Status of Women Committee. And it seems to me that all the points you have raised actually support the idea of an independent inquiry, because that gives us an opportunity to reflect and consider. And you mentioned that there have been many studies already. I acknowledge that there have been studies, but changes haven't taken place. And if we can bring a motion here, I mean, we brought a motion here for Hockey Canada, and things started moving. People started daring to speak. And this committee and Parliament is a place where that can happen, and the status of women. So I want to underscore all the work that was done, especially within the media, to break this culture of silence and to get to the bottom of these things. So can we really have the luxury of not having an inquiry?
Absolutely. We'll lose time and money, and we'll lose progress. We have the information we need to move forward. If you're asking why more progress has not been made, it is a cultural challenge. It's a multifaceted, multi-pronged solution that's needed. Everything from governance to funding to training and education, and getting the NSOs and PSOs to sign on to OSIC and or equivalent complaint mechanisms, getting the UCCMS filtered throughout the sports system, and very importantly, dealing with system alignment. Because at the moment, there's a disconnect between the authority an NSO has over a PSO, and subsequently, the authority a PSO has over community sport. And that's only the sports that are within the system. Many sports are run completely independent of Sport Canada or the PSO system. So we know enough to move forward. Let's use that information and implement the solutions that are being talked about here on this panel.
La question demeure, évidemment.
But the question remains, and I'd just like to hark back to Minister Saint-Onge's comments. We're talking about how and when. No charges have been laid despite many investigations. Now, we're waiting for the new sports policy for 2022-2023. Have you discussed this policy with the Minister of Sport? And what recommendations would you make?
I think one of the challenges around your question of charges being laid is that so many of the harmful behaviors fall under the criminal threshold, and yet that's what's causing athletes so much harm. The sexual abuse is part of the criminal system, can be dealt with there, but the other forms that are so harmful and prevalent fall under that threshold. So the Canadian sport policy needs to deal with returning to what are the values of sport and how can those be reflected from grassroots to national level, and how can they be funded, and organizations be held accountable for adhering to those values. Imagine a sports system that's funded based on the health and well-being of athletes. The research will tell you if you funded a sports system based on health and well-being, performance outcomes would emerge as a byproduct.
Mais évidemment, je me rends pas à votre conclusion.
I don't come to the same conclusion as you. I think that there's this culture of silence, and if we refuse to go to the bottom of things, it just perpetuates that culture of silence. Now, if there were an independent public inquiry into sport, would you be willing to come and talk about the kinds of appearance of conflict a situation of conflict of interest that you may be in yourself? Why? Because I see that your own positions are in conflict with the positions of many other researchers.
You have 8 seconds left to answer, Ms. Kerr.
It's not unlike researchers to disagree. That's how we get to the bottom of issues. And many athletes have already told us what they need to move forward. We don't need another inquiry for that. They need independent mechanisms. They need sport leaders who are trained. They need the values embedded in high-performance sport, and they need the system funded differently. We have all the information we need to move forward. Thank you.
Keep you
Merci
wrap up
beaucoup.
your answer. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to move to the NDP, Peter Julian. But before I give Peter his 6 minutes, I wanted to say it looks like every questioner so far have invoked the WAR principle, which is to go over time. So there we go. We've now got Peter can get the benefit of the WAR principle. Thank you. 6 minutes plus.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, because you've given me license to go beyond that, and I appreciate that.
It's not indefinite.
Thank you. I wanted to thank each of the witnesses here today. You've brought very important testimony to this table, and it is something as members of the committee that we embarked on last year, not knowing the destination, but understanding that there were problems in Canadian sports. We now understand that there is a crisis in Canadian sports in terms of keeping athletes safe. When our daughters and sons go into these into sports organizations, there has to be an understanding that they are safe, that athletes are safe, that the public is safe, that everyone is safe. And so your testimony helps us, I think, to formulate what we will do eventually, which is provide recommendations to the government. And I'd like to start in terms of questions with you, Ms. Forsyth. And words can really not express how sorry we should all be about what happened to you and what happens to far too many athletes and members of the public. You simply were not in a safe environment. Now, you've, I think from that, understood the importance of putting into place systems that will protect all athletes, protect the public. And you mentioned in your testimony that we have organizations that are basically looking at minimum levels. They're basically not obeying the spirit of putting safe sports into place, but I imagine putting forward more of a facade. How do you see us getting to the point in this country where all athletes are safe, where the public is safe? What are the investments that are required, and how can organizations be forced to go beyond that minimum sort of facade to actually put in place a full regime of safe sports to protect everybody?
Thank you very much for that excellent question, and I'm honored to answer it from my perspective as a survivor and an expert. To start with, when it has become very clear to us, and I mean this with all the respect to policymakers and analysts in the world, but our sports system has been built off of, a tick-the-box method, which when I speak to organizations and I say just clearly, because I am who I am, what are you doing about safe sport? They say, well, we have a policy. And I say, well, does anyone know about that policy? Are you educating on that policy? If I walk onto your field of play right now and I ask a child if they know what bullying is, will they give me that answer? So what we're doing is we are thinking that policies prevent abuse. And that is the number one way that we are ticking the box. The other thing that the sports system does is that we say, okay, your minimum standard is online training. Now, I will be the first to say I have the utmost respect and have contributed to creating online training modules. And I'm also the first to tell you that when I'm doing my online training of any sort, I usually look to the left and I click my cursor as quickly as I can to get it done. So that's why when I say that we're doing the minimum standard, your online training will provide baseline generalized information and awareness, and every organization must level that up with sport-specific and participant-specific education. I also want to be clear to share that there is predatorial abuse that we know, and then there's also, as Dr. Fowler mentioned, cultural norm abuse, which are behaviors that are ingrained in our coaches based on how they were coached. So what I am sharing here is the complexity of the issue, in that we need to put in such a huge concerted effort to not lose faith in our coaches as people of positions of authority, but to educate and honestly deprogram them from the way sport has always been. This crisis is here right now because sport has always been this way, and we are actually getting ahead of the crisis because we're finally talking about it. So what we need, to get back to your question, is we need a massive investment, I know that's hard to hear, of resources around education, around policies that are not only put in place, but forced to be taken off the paper and into practice, auditing, compliance, independent mechanisms. And the reality is we've only approached this issue from the top down. It is ridiculous to me, since I started in this advocacy work 4.5 years ago, learning how our government worked in this nature, with all respect to jurisdiction. I could not fathom why we could put in place safeguarding measures only at the national level. And I wish if I could do it all over again, I would have fought harder, to be honest. So the time is now. The children are what matter more than anything, in my opinion. I say that as a mother who sees everyday issues in her children's sports still. And I just want to encourage everyone to step forward and get on the same page and play together in the playing field of, preventing maltreatment.
Thank you very much. Je vais passer maintenant à Madame Poirier.
I'm now going to move on to Ms. Poirier. You mentioned 500 complaints that you receive every year. Did I understand you correctly? And I wanted to know how often you're dealing with criminal issues, because out of those complaints, I'm sure that some of this goes beyond the organization. So what do you do when there is a very serious complaint, so serious that it should be referred to another level, like the police, for example, or the legal system?
Oui, vous avez juste...
Go ahead. First, when I say 500 complaints, we've been managing those complaints since the 1st of February 2021. And it's based on the policy of sport integrity. So there are different independent parts. Here at Alias, we receive the complaints. And the policy that we apply is very clear with respect to the nature of the cases. For example, whether those cases are sexual abuse or safety, compromised safety of athletes. So we do work with police services. We will work, for example, with child protection. And in the statistics that were tabled yesterday in the Legislative Assembly, they pointed out that 12% of those 500 complaints did actually involve sexual abuse. So these are complaints that have to be managed very carefully and in collaboration with the Child Protection Agency and police services.
Ms. Poirier, we've just abused the war factor here. Thank you very much. Now we're going to go to the second round of questions, and that is going to be begun with, for the Conservatives, Kevin Waugh. Kevin, 5 minutes, please.
Okay, it will be 5 minutes. I'm glad that you are all here. Ms. Forsyth, thank you. I mean, you were a great athlete in the early 2000s. You've hit it right on, top down. The community associations in this country, thousands of them, don't have the capabilities of safe sport. They don't even talk to their provincial associations. My association in Saskatchewan may be different than Alberta, may be different than Nova Scotia. So we have a real disconnect problem with OSIC. You can talk about the national programs, the NSOs, but when we don't include the community associations in this country, literally hundreds of thousands of them, that's where it has to start. And who's going to fund that? And that's the issue that we have right now. When OSIC started, the provincial government saying, who's going to afford this? Who's going to put the bill to this? So your thoughts on that? Because you did mention top down. It should be the other way. Start at the bottom and work up.
And thank you very much for that question. And the other thing that I just wanted to add, not that you asked, but capacity is something that we need to also bring into this conversation. And I'll use the U.S. Center for Safe Sport as an example, which was struck after the horrific Larry Nassar case out of the USA Gymnastics Organization. Why I bring up capacity is because it is essential that if a complainant comes forward, not only will the complaint be heard in a timely manner, but they will receive consistent and constant communication as to their complaint. And when we build structures and we build organizations and we fund organizations like OSIC, we need to fund them to the degree to anticipate based on experts like Alias in the room, of how many complaints they should anticipate over a calendar year. We are, as I mentioned in our statement, being overrun with complaints at all levels of sport. And when it comes to the grassroots organizations, I feel, quite frankly, that I am literally on a plane or a bus every week trying to get to every single one of them. And I say that with all the respect in the world. I was just recently in a beautiful town of Weyburn, Saskatchewan, in front of 50 coaches. So we need economies of scale, and we need commitment from our provincial governments to fund this above and beyond anything else. Safe sport is so critical that my key message when I go into a room is you should not even have an organization if you don't have the budget and can allow for safe sport funding. The reality is we also have organizations say to us, but Allison, which I respect, they say, Allison, we can't even get volunteers. And why, if we can't even get volunteers, how do you expect us to train them on safe sport? To which I think any parent would say, you know, the reality of operating your community association or your local club is that there are critical aspects that you must do in order to be operational, and minimum standards at the very least for volunteer training is a critical aspect of what they need to do. So I wish I had all the dollars in the world, of which I don't.
all do.
But I know we desperately need more people, more resources, and more funding to get to all of these incredible clubs full of our children.
What's happening? And I'm going to go to you, Dr. Kerr, because I looked at the gymnastics board minutes from September 6, 2021, Gym Canada, where Ellen McPherson, who was the Safe Sports Director for 3.5 years with Canada Gym, left to accept a research role with the University of Toronto, maybe with you. So here now, Gym Canada has no experience in safe sport. People are being pilfered from these organizations to research because research pays money. Can you talk about that? I don't know if Ellen McPherson is with you or the University of Toronto, but that's been the issue with these sport organizations. When you get them up to speed, they're being pilfered for other organizations, and especially academics who look for research dollars.
So I'll start by saying that Ellen is not a researcher with me, and that Gymnastics Canada has a wonderful new safe sport officer who comes with a broad research base of knowledge. So, and it's really important. We have researchers in these roles, so they are making evidence-based decisions. The challenge with safe sport officers that sport organizations are incorporating,
30 seconds.
It's like putting your thumb on the dike. It's such a small step forward, and they still have to work in a culture with all of these other tensions and barriers that they're not in a position to solve. And so we're putting them in a position where it's very difficult to succeed.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that with 3 seconds left.
Thank you, Kevin. You know it's with great affection that I refer to the war principle. Okay, thank you. We now go to the Liberals, and it's Tim Lewis. Tim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here, both online and in person. Cut things down because I've learned so much already. Ms. Forsyth, I heard the need for more education, and I've heard you in previous testimony compare it to how we treat concussions now versus how we used to treat concussions. You've said much like concussions, once we know better about this type of abuse, we can do better. Can you help explain how we need to address the culture that quote, it's always been this way, or someone saying, well, this is what I went through when I was in sports and I came out okay. What are some of the measures we can take as parents, as associations, as governments, and what solutions already exist? You use words already like deprogrammed, ingrained. That's an uphill battle.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Again, I mean, we have incredible researchers on this panel that have done the numbers and the science behind this. Mine comes from firsthand experience of, standing in auditoriums full of football coaches, bearing down on me with their arms crossed and saying, who are you to tell me we can't run suicides anymore? So I'll just speak from that firsthand experience where what I see when it comes to coaching as what we now would probably consider, depending on the severity of it, psychological abuse. The yelling and the beratement and the toughen up method of yelling at children to do better. Children do not have the ability to separate who they are from what is happening on the ice or on the field. So what we know now, in my understanding, is we are traumatizing that child's brain, much like concussions, when we are yelling at them and screaming at them. As a coach, as an athlete, I was yelled at and screamed at, and that was just normalized back then. So I wish I had a magic answer, but it's actually looking at each individual sport and the behaviors that are paramount in that sport. Ice hockey being the perfect example of where I do see a lot of psychological maltreatment with the coaching style. The other thing I work with coaches on is the reality I just want to share. We're working with Generation Z athletes now, which are age 12 to 25 primarily, and they don't even respond to negative reinforcement coaching. So the examples I use is when we know better, we do better, because not only do we understand, I believe, more about what trauma is, but we also understand that we're dealing with a new generation of athletes that adapt and respond differently. So the last thing I'll share, if I may, is when it comes to something like, say, running of suicides or in hockey bag skating, now that is considered exercise as a form of punishment, we have to look at where that starts, because there's a progression of harm. So if coaches are just making athletes drop and do 20 push-ups, would that be considered an egregious case of maltreatment? Likely not. But can that easily progress to children skating around in a circle on the ice until one child vomits in a garbage can, which is quite common? Absolutely, it can. So that's when I mentioned we need to eliminate the beginnings of the microaggressions and the conditions of where more egregious abuse can occur. And that, unfortunately, will not be covered in your online training. It needs to be very much resourced in every single organization across this country.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll turn to Madame Poirier. How do we get athletes to trust the system that they believe has failed them? If they don't trust the system, what can we do to build that trust so they have the courage to come forward and file a complaint? You seem to be perfectly situated for that answer.
Well, everything is based on three fundamental principles. The first has to do with the culture and ethics surrounding that process. We need to make sure that there is a simple policy that athletes understand. We need to make sure that we're making that known. We have to allow for a simple process like a click, a button to say, I'm going to complain, I'm going to lay a complaint. We also have to educate, and there have to be educational tools. So that's actually all falls under culture and whistleblowing. Now, there also has to be a strong, rigorous process. It has to be confidential, anonymous. And the third part to this is that we need to show that we are able to deal with that complaint and deal with it objectively, independently, while respecting best practices. So those are the three parts to the system so that it will be trusted. And in Quebec, the number of complaints increased by 230% between the first and the second year.
I think I'm out of time, but I would have asked if we could scale that up to a national level. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And now we go to Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes. Sébastien?
Mr. Lemire, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Now, I want to come back to the issue of money. We've seen that there is a lot of money in sport, and that's why we need an inquiry. And unfortunately, that money benefits the wrong people. Ms. Forsyth, I'd like to say thank you for your courage and for being a part of the solution. You truly are an example. I thank you for that. Now, my time is limited. Ms. Poirier and Mr. Whale, thank you for being part of the solution. So you developed this process, and I'm wondering if this process could be used to go even further at the federal level and if an inquiry would be part of that. And I'd like to know how that complaint process would work. Well, all the complaints that we receive are treated confidentially. Now, if there were an inquiry, perhaps what Alias could contribute is our experience. By drawing on what we've done and what we've seen, because we have considerable experience of different situations, and that could lead to good recommendations. And in fact, we did table a brief with you, and in that brief, you will find 9 recommendations in order to ensure that in the future, this kind of process can work well. Thank you very much for your answer. And I would add this. If there were a public independent inquiry, there can also be anonymous testimony that can lead to recommendations. Ms. Fowler, I was really interested in your opening remarks and the whole concept of health and healthy sport practice. Now, you also have expertise with First Nations. There's the whole issue of reparation. And I heard about things like allowing lacrosse to be an Olympic sport. And do you think that we should be attaching more value to these kinds of initiatives?
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there because we've gone over the 2.5 minutes, and Ms. Fowler could kind of elaborate on that when she gets a chance with another question.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, out of respect, because there is often a delay with the interpretation, could you just give her 15 seconds to answer?
I think we can do that. Oh, like 15
Merci,
seconds, but hard 15. Okay.
Hard 15 seconds. Thank you so much for that question. And I just need to first caveat my experience with First Nations is through our children are mixed race, they're First Nations. And I really believe that absolutely we need to pay more attention to Indigenous sport in this country. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Okay, and so we now go to Mr. Julian for 2.5 minutes, please, Peter.
Thank you very much. I wanted to go to Mr. Gumbley and to Professor Kidd. The issue of OSIC and whether or not it covers, for example, players in the Canadian Hockey League is an important one. So I wanted to put that to you, Mr. Gumbley. Do you feel that a mechanism like OSIC would be an important protection for players in the Canadian Hockey League? And for Professor Kidd, the same question, expanding it to all types of amateur sport.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do feel that OSIC could add some benefit to the Canadian Hockey League, but the issue is that the CHL operates in a vacuum. They don't fall under the NSO Hockey Canada. They're a pro league. They're not able to, NSO and the federal government is not able to do anything with, enforce any laws with the CHL. And that's evident from my conversation with the previous ministers, where they've informed me that they have no jurisdiction over the Canadian Hockey League. So in order for that to happen, there would have to be some governance changes within the policies of the federal government, the NSOs, to bring the CHL in under that umbrella. But my position is that the Canadian Hockey League is a professional ice hockey league. It's a pro sport business, and I don't believe that they fall under that kind of auspices.
Thank you. Professor Kidd?
Well, the goal is to have OSIC cover all levels of Canadian sport. I fully agree with that. The challenges, as we've heard all afternoon, are one, Canadian federalism. You've got to get an FPT buy-in for that. And secondly, the largely autonomous nature of Canadian sport in this country. It's a challenge. It's instructive that 30 years ago, when we implemented anti-doping, it had to be done through a consent mechanism, not by an imposition mechanism. And I think we need a strategy to get consent buy-in across the country at every level. We've got to enable OSIC to develop the capacity, and then as an outgrowth of the educational campaign that I talked about, Allison talked about, others have talked about, we need to persuade people to enable their participants to have access to either OSIC or aligned bodies that are being created in provinces like Quebec. And that's going to take...
Thank you, Mr. Kidd. Professor Kidd, we can elaborate at another time. And so we're going to go now to the Conservatives. Mr. Shields, 5 minutes, please.
Here today. Professor Kidd, I remember you as a participant, you as an athlete. I remember when you were a young athlete, by the way, and watching you.
Still young.
So I want to go back to that time. I want to go back to the time when you experienced community coaches, community people, school level that you experienced. And I'm not talking professional coaches. Has it changed from when you were an athlete to now?
It's changed enormously. People like me made the Olympics on the basis of public and community programs, and they were largely accessible given the nature of society in those times, and particularly for working class children. It was mostly for boys. There was nowhere near the access for girls then, but in class terms, it was widely accessible. My friend Rick Grunow has written an article. Gordie Howe wouldn't make it to the NHL anymore because the costs in the pay-for-play system of Canadian sport are so high that only the upper middle class, with a few exceptions, play sport. That's one of the big reasons why participation in sport is so low and is dropping like a stone. We need to restore both public programs in municipalities and schools, which have been immiserated both by neoliberalism and COVID, and we need to provide the capacity to a much more complex capacity, as panelists have said, to the volunteer community programs, because the expectations today are much, much, much higher. They were when I was able to develop success in a volunteer community program. I love the idea.
Yeah, you've touched on a very critical piece, the volunteer aspect. I was a coach for my 12-year-old son because there was nobody else that would do it. And so my son says, I can't play unless you coach, Dad. That was it. And I find it now, I mean, it's been 20 years since I've been out of the school system of coaching, but even then to find people to coach was a brutally hard job to coach in school athletic programs for the reasons that we've heard today. How do we change that?
Well, that is correct. The easy answer, which several of us have said, is to put sport in national health and welfare, where it started, and to invest in it as part of the national health program because of the resilience and other benefits that it provides, and treat it like education with good facilities, trained teachers, accountable leadership, and concerns about equity in class, racial and other terms. I don't think this country is ready for that, but there are other countries like Norway, which have done this very well, and we should continue to demand that sport be treated as the public good that it is, rather than as a private, if you're rich enough or your parents can buy entry into that league. So thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate your question and your intent.
At this time, Madam Chair, I would like to take my last minute to move a motion that has been distributed in both official languages to do with the study of safe sport, addressing a letter that we received that is out there from Fencing for Change in Canada, the Minister of Sport. So it's all been distributed. I think we can deal with this quickly. Madam Chair?
Yes, you have a motion on the floor, and so I will ask the committee if there is any objection to the motion, anyone opposed to it. I can't see the floor. The clerk will let me know if anyone is putting up their hands as an opposition. No.
There appear to be thumbs up all around.
Good. So then I think there seems to be unanimity, but I think, could we call the question on the motion, please?
On consent, Madam Chair.
Pardon? I don't know about the people online. We have Mr. Coteau putting his thumb up. So yes, we have unanimity. The motion passes.
Juste pouvoir la relire, s'il vous plaît, Madame la Présidente.
Could you just read it out again in order to make sure that we all understand what we're dealing with?
Mr. Shield.
The committee's study on safe sport in Canada, and given the addressing of an open letter from Fencing for Change Canada to the Minister of Sport regarding allegations of abuse within the Canadian Fencing Federation, the committee invite members of the Board of Directors of the Chamber of Canadian Fencing Federation to appear before the committee.
Are you happy with that, Mr. Lemire?
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just thought it was important that it be read into the record, especially for the purposes of people who are listening, and I would improve it by asking for financial records for the last 5 years. And like for Soccer Canada, that it doesn't necessarily interfere with what's already on our agenda for future meetings.
Can you please put that in the form of an amendment?
Donc, je ferai un amendement de...
Well, then I would add an amendment by asking Fencing Canada to provide financial records and minutes for the past 5 years, and that this motion not interfere with the meetings already allocated for this study.
Thank you. There is an amendment to the motion, and I would see if there's anybody who is opposed to that amendment. Mr. Coteau, are you okay with it?
Sure.
Yes. Is there anybody on the floor that's opposed? Clerk? Since there's no one opposed, it would seem as if the amendment has passed unanimously, and so now we will have to go back and vote on the amended motion. So the motion is amended. Anyone opposed? No one opposed, so the motion as amended passes unanimously. And now, with your indulgence, please, committee, we do have Mr. Coteau waiting for his moment in the sun, his 5 minutes of questions, and then we will end the meeting. So, Mr. Coteau, for 5 minutes, please, your question.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I believe, I thank you for the opportunity. I guess I was really, what Mr. Kidd was saying earlier about, seeing sport as the public good, this really resonates with me. I actually worked with Mr. Kidd on the Pan Am Games when I was responsible for the Pan Am Games in 2015. And, it was an interesting world that I got exposed to, because I was never involved at within sport at that kind of level. And, I do notice a disconnect between the athletes and those who run sport. And I think that, I've always believed that sport is one of the great equalizers. It opens up opportunity. And I think Nelson Mandela said, sport can change the world. I truly, truly believe that. And I remember during the Pan Am Games going to a local football field, a soccer field in my community in Flemington Park, and just watching kids play. And there's nothing more joyful than seeing young kids actually enjoying what they're doing, and youth playing a sport and really enjoying what they're doing. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here today, all of the witnesses for the work they do in sport, because it is something that can actually change the world. I believe that 100%. And the issues that were brought up today, very important issues. But I do have one question. throughout this process as a committee member and just as an MP and as someone who believes in the power of sport, there's not much mention when we talk about safe sport. There's not much mention about the impact of racism in sport. We do have some really, really serious issues that do come forward. And I just wanted to ask, maybe I'll start with Mr. Kidd. When we talk about safe sport, how does racism and discrimination fit into the best practices and what the sports sector is really trying to achieve in creating a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable environment for young people and for all people who want to participate in sport. So maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Kidd.
Mr. Kidd, please.
Racism is a form of harm that is experienced by boys and girls, men and women of color. It can be a terrible barrier to participation, along with the class and opportunity barriers. In a community that I know well, Scarborough, where you continue to serve. It's a huge barrier, and I think that by broadening the definition of what we don't want to see in sport through the UCCMS, we explicitly label racism as one of the harms that should be eradicated.
Why do you think it's not like, and maybe within your circles, it's an issue that, is brought up often, but, through my experience on this committee, it's not an issue that, is brought up often when we talk about safe sport. Why do you think that is? Do you think I'm missing something, or do you think it still needs to be more broadly defined and incorporated into those discussions? Any thoughts on that?
I would suggest that the racial background of Canadian sport and those who come forward with these horrible stories of abuse, reflect the class and racial character of Canada, even cities, and it's not representative of the racial diversity of Canada today.
I am. Do I have more time, Madam Chair?
You have about 38 seconds.
38 seconds. Well, I'll tell a little story. When I was involved at the Ontario Legislature, a hockey coach called me and he was telling me about this young man from Rexdale who was the best hockey player on the team, and there was some racial slurs said to him. And he was 16. He was 6'4", the best player in that division. And he quit hockey because of what was happening to him on the ice. And I just think of those stories of the missed opportunity because of hurt and hurtful, hateful things that are said in all levels. As a woman, as someone who's part of the LGBTQ community, as a Black person. And I think that we have an opportunity as people who believe in the power of sport to really make a difference. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. The stories we've heard today and the strength it takes to come and share your stories. I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing and continue to do. And I look forward to working with all of you to look for ways to eliminate those barriers. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. And now I would like to thank the witnesses for coming. Very extraordinarily interesting and informative meeting. Thank you very much. And so I will now declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Merci à tout le monde.